Let me introduce you to the areas of port hacking that are important to the shorebirds. This section of the tidal flats of Port Hacking is where the shorebirds feed on the falling through to rising tide. These areas are where the birds roost over the high tide. They have a preference for this island, but due to climate change, their roost has been seriously eroded, seeing it go underwater at the highest point of high tides when they move over to the main beach. But the beach can get really busy, causing birds to sometimes abandon Port Hacking to go over to Botany Bay. This area on the beach is where the pied oyster catchers and marsh lapwings nest. Port Hacking is used by 19 species of migratory birds and 8 species of resident shorebirds. Why Port Hacking? It has a large variety of food to suit the different species. Here we see an eastern curlew eating a saltwater nipper, then eating a crab. A bar-tailed godwit eating a soldier crab, and double-banded plovers that are the world's only east-west migratory shorebird, here from the high country of the South Island of New Zealand during our winter, eating soldier crabs. Pied oyster catchers, which are resident shorebirds that breed on D-band spit, eating shellfish. And a redneck stint pulling out worms. The little terns that breed in Botany Bay bring their fledglings to Port Hacking to learn how to fish before they migrate to seas north of Japan. This is a resident red-capped plover sitting in front of a double-banded plover that is in breeding colours ready to go back to New Zealand to nest. And a bird many will recognise because of its call and swooping behaviour, another of our beach nesting birds, the marsh lapwing, with chicks. At the end of summer in early autumn, the Northern Hemisphere migratory birds leave Port Hacking to head to their breeding grounds up in the subarctic, with a refuelling stop around the areas of the Yellow Sea covering China, Japan and the Koreas. Part of the science around trying to learn more about the incredible journey these birds undertake is to put leg flags on them to be able to re-site them in the future. Port Hacking has seen one bar-tailed godwit that was flagged on its northward journey at Chongming Island, just north of Shanghai, this area here, and the only female eastern curlew in the world with this particular green over blue right leg flag put on her for her first ever southward migration after hatching. The parent birds had already departed the breeding grounds, leaving the chicks to fatten up and gain strength, and then the new fledglings do the trip without any mature bird assistance. Instinct is all they have in their toolkit to work out how and where to go. She was flagged in Yangtze Province, this area here, and for perspective, this is Shanghai and the mighty Yangtze River. Each year, when the shorebirds arrive into Australia, their feathers start to molt. The feather on the bottom looks extremely ragged. This feather would be one that a bird has worn all year that has travelled from Sydney to the subarctic and back. The top feather is likely from a juvenile that stayed in Sydney for the winter rather than migrate. Having only done one trip north-south, the feather is in much better condition. This shows an example of the Tolda non-stop flight from Alaska, a journey that can take as much as 11 days at an average flight speed of around 60 kilometres an hour non-stop, flapping the whole way, takes on body condition. This bird has used up all its fat stores and some of its muscle and is basically a bag of bones. It needs time to recover undisturbed from such an enormous flight. We have been lucky for 2 years running now to host a bar-tailed godwit flagged CLJ that was leg flagged as a first-year bird at Corner Inlet in Victoria in 2014. Last year she turned up here in Port Hacking looking quite haggard after the long flight, stayed 2 weeks to rest and put on weight before continuing back to Victoria. On the left you can see how shrunken her chest is with the fat reserves having been used up. The photo on the right shows how she looked 2 weeks later, but the bird behind her shows what weight she will be wanting to get to before achieving healthy weight. This year she returned within 2 days of her arrival date of last year. Collection of leg flag data and satellite tracked birds shows arrival and departure dates of individual bar-tailed godwits is sometimes exact each year. So how do the birds do it? They can more than double their body weight. Here is an example of a curlew that has the weight piled on, ready to leave for migration. She did leave on the night this video was taken, and you can see her standing next to a non-migration ready curlew. As well as putting on weight, they start to colour up into reddish breeding colours that better matches the Arctic tundra rather than the grey-browns that match Australian mudflats. While still in Australia, the reddish colour appears underneath to avoid standing out on the Australian mudflats. Then the colour change continues at the refuelling stops around the Yellow Sea. The biggest threat to shorebirds while in Australia is habitat loss. That can happen due to environmental factors such as roost sites eroding when big storms hit. But there is also a big problem with disturbance. If erosion or disturbance becomes too bad, then birds can abandon a site, which can prove disastrous, not just for the birds that reside over the summer, but for those still on their migration journey and in need of a rest, like CLJ the godwit. If a wetland they have imprinted in their memory disappears, then they have no energy in the tank to find a new one. All the wetlands along the flyways should not be considered as individual areas, but all linked in one long chain from Australia and New Zealand all the way to the subarctic. Take one out that birds have been relying on, and there can be population collapse. So, how can you help? When out kayaking or walking around in shorebird areas, keep 100 metres away from birds. If a shorebird area is declared a no-dog area, then follow those directions. It doesn't matter if your dog is on lead or off lead. Birds will scatter if you're heading their way. It doesn't matter if it's a big dog, a little dog, a slow dog, a dog that wouldn't hurt a fly. Birds see all dogs as predators. Here's an example with the dog on lead. Watch how far away the on-lead dog is away from the scattering birds. There are only 2 areas in Greater Sydney that eastern curlews use as roosting sites, so it is important to preserve Port Hacking as a safe space. The shorebird areas around Botany Bay and beach and tidal flats of Port Hacking near Main Bar do not permit dogs at any time, either on or off lead. If you see someone with a dog in these areas, then talk to them and remind them that dogs are not permitted. Too many dog owners are just claiming they didn't see a sign saying dogs are not permitted, even though they are well aware of their responsibilities as dog owners. The Scoop the Poop campaign, when it was first introduced, relied on people calling other people out if they did not clean up after their dog. The Shire is a big place with enforcement officers not able to be everywhere at once, so reminding people dogs are not permitted because of the presence of critically endangered migratory shorebirds can help protect their habitat and prevent them from becoming locally extinct in Sydney. Too many local extinctions leads to total extinction. As an example, there was a story in the bulletin of the Sutherland Shire Historical Society in February 2003, which covered fishing tales of the hacking in the 40s and 50s. It talked about how the increase in population and use of the waterway caused the loss of habitat for the huge flocks of magnificent black swans that fed and nested along the hacking. During the 40s and 50s, these were a feature of the port, but continuous harassment by local dogs drove them out. It is now rare to see one. Penguins and stone curlews are now locally extinct. The decades of empty words acknowledging the problem the shore and water birds in Port Hacking are facing has never been addressed, and an actual plan urgently needs to be made to meet the obligations under the National EPBC Act to protect migratory shorebirds. When out walking, pick up plastic, as birds can mistake it for jellyfish and start trying to eat it, which can end up getting stuck in their gut and kill them. Here we can see that an eastern curlew has been trying to dig up this broken plastic cup. Fishing line is harder to see, but everywhere on the shoreline. It gets caught in seaweed, the seaweed gets dislodged, then the weeds are washed up on the beaches, and birds that are hungry after the high tide roost start picking around in the washed up sea wrack. The line can then get caught on the bird or tangled on legs, which can then end up with the loss of a leg. It would be so sad to never hear this call on the tidal flats again, because we didn't take the time to care for our shorebird habitat. With a little bit of help on everybody's part, we can keep these birds flying well into the future. To finish, I'll share some images of Port Hacking's miracle chick, a pied oyster catcher, from egg to fledge with the chick's first flight at the end. Australia's beach nesting birds have it so tough, placing their nests just as people are starting to flock to the beach. Against all odds, 30 days growing in an egg on the sand, then 7 weeks flightless, the parent birds kept this little cutie safe. They would swim it from the beach to the mangroves when the tide had dropped enough for the chick to be able to stand and hide in amongst the base of the trees. As the tide rose, they would fly to the beach, calling the chick to swim across to sleep out the high tide.
I'm like a bird, I only fly away. I don't know where my soul is, I don't know where my home is. And your faith in me brings me to tears. Even after all these years, and it pains me so much to say